Welcome to All Ears Podcast Festival. I am Prikuti Rai, co-creator of Boju Bajai.
Hi everyone, I'm Isha. I'm also the co-creator of Boju Bajai. Thank you for joining us today. This session, both Prikuti and I and sort of our team at Boju Bajai, we've been really looking forward to it because I feel like what Carl is going to offer today in terms of his insights, his experiences, it's going to be useful not just for podcasters, but for anyone who's sort of creating content online and where they engage directly with their audience or have a community to engage with. And I mean, what can I say about Carl? Like, I'm slightly envious of how multi-talented he is.
Mula sa Quezon City, ako si Robbie Alampay, PumaPodcast.
What I want to do is bring the spotlight to those who don't have it a lot.
Around the world, journalists face imprisonment and criminal charges for doing their job.
You weren't only talking about news, you were talking about information.
Nakikinig po kayo sa Radyo Malaya. Magandang umaga, Pilipinas!
So, Carl currently is the CEO of PumaPodcast, which is an award-winning non-music audio production company. But he's been a contributor and a writer in broadsheets, in magazines, TV, films, comics. He was a director for a social enterprise, deputy director for marketing. He was a creative writing professor, co-founder of an independent publishing house, co-owner of a bookstore dedicated to Filipino literature and arts, and managing editor of an award-winning comic book imprint as well. So, I mean, I feel like I need at least 3 lifetimes to do everything that Carl has done so far. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Carl Javier, the CEO of PumaPodcast. Hi, Carl.
Hi, Carl. Welcome to All Ears.
Hi, guys. Thanks. Thank you for inviting me, Tisha and Brikuti and Boju Bajai. I hope I'm pronouncing that as closely as possible to what is correct. I'm suddenly very shy about my introduction. Thank you. I'm very flattered. So I'll jump into my presentation, and I hope that I'm not giving people a roadmap on execution, but I'm going to share with them how to think about approaching things. And I'd love if at the end of it all, we had a conversation about that. So I shall share my screen.
Please go ahead.
And great. I joined PumaPodcast in 2019. The company was founded at the end of 2018. And when I joined, they had released one episode that was narrative, and they started doing news. And they'd been doing news for about a week when I jumped on board. And the idea was for me to help build out the team. I came on as a chief operating officer, but for some reason I was promoted to CEO. I still don't know. Anyway, the overview of my talk will be one. We recently did this audience survey, and we want to share what we learned because we feel like what we learned in that survey is going to be helpful to everyone. And then I'll talk about some of the best practices of the organization, and then we'll go into a Q&A. So why did we do an audience survey? One is we have this so I'm going to keep using the word intense throughout, but we're intense and we're keenly aware of how much audience matters. On one level, towards business sustainability, if you don't have an audience, then you don't have that much leverage. You don't have that much opportunity. When we began at PumaPodcast, we were being confronted with the basic question of, do Filipinos even bother to listen to podcasts? And where we are now, or where we were when we conducted the study was, yes, Filipinos listen. In fact, we hit something like 11 million downloads per week as a nation. But then the question became, but are you able to connect with an audience? And we think that even though, the market is flooded with people who just listen to celebrity podcasters, if we are able to prove that our organization is drawing an important audience, then it will be meaningful. So that's one reason why we wanted to connect with audiences. And the other is that since the pandemic started, we had very little contact with our audiences apart from a few surveys. So we dropped a few surveys and that was it. social media interaction was so limited because of the toxicity of like online behavior. In fact, I'll talk about it later as well, but because of how toxic things are on public platforms like Facebook and Twitter, people don't want to post their feelings. And it's like the negative people who have the energy to post negative things. But the people who actually want to have conversations with you, you don't get access to because they are repelled by like negative behaviors. And so we had a lot of data. And it is really good to have data. Like making sure that you're on a publishing platform that lets you track your listeners is important. One of the things that we obsess over is retention. Do people continue to listen to us? But there's a limit to what that can get you. And even someone dropping you like a DM is way more meaningful than data points when it comes to quality and meaningfulness of your work. And so we wanted to generate new information, and we wanted to test and challenge the assumptions that we had. Okay. So one thing that we did was through the help of Splice and the support of IMS, we decided to do an audience listening study. Social listening, there's different ways to phrase it, but basically we wanted to hear what the audience was talking about. And the reason why we called it a remix, because like I wanted to be as nerdy and thematic as possible. But when you think of like the original track, right? The first song, the song that's on the album, that is the artist vision. And so what we were going from for the 3 years that we were running, or 2 years by the time we done this, what we were operating on was our artistic assumptions of what the audience wanted. We were creators who had identified gaps in the, in the content, and we were creating things to fill those gaps. But we'd actually reached a point where we weren't sure how well that was connecting. And again, I love the idea of remixes, of people taking a song and like adding something onto it. And so this idea that we could take our current content offering and incorporate the audience into what we were doing so that they would actually have meaningful involvement in our content development. That was one of the goals, was really to make it meaningful, not just for us throwing it one way, but to make it a conversation with the many stakeholders that we have. On a very basic level, the best way to get answers from people is to ask them to talk, and not with like social media post where you have to bank on the phrasing, and then you have to hope that the algorithm lets you through, and then you have to pay a bunch of money to break through certain layers of the algorithm, but then they'll feed it to people. We all know this. Anybody here who has put an ad and put money behind the ad has had to deal with trolls after a certain amount. So these aren't the people that we wanted to be talking to. And so actually having a systematic approach to talking to the audience was important, and Splice helped us to do that. So I just wanted to talk quickly about one of our basic assumptions, and the one that we wanted to test is, could we monetize our audience? Because one, the majority of our country remains unbanked. And if they're unbanked, then by extension, they have no access to credit. And then by the next extension, they have no access to paying for certain services or systems because of their lack of credit cards. Pre-pandemic, we had such low adoption of digital transfers, digital currencies, etc., etc. So this is one of the assumptions that we had, that people would not pay. And then like in the Philippines, we are also notorious for not paying for things. For example, in gaming, if a Filipino can, instead of paying 99 cents to get more energy in Candy Crush, they will actually make a new account and then play on the new account rather than pay 99 cents US. This was observed behavior. In fact, at least in video games, at least for the time that I had formed my assumptions, we were seen as a market that you could beta test things on and see what the bugs are, because we wouldn't pay. So it wasn't worth your money to pay, to run it here as a paid service. Add on the fact that legally, nobody in the Philippines has access to The Mandalorian. And yet, anytime that an episode of The Mandalorian or Boba Fett came out, everybody had a comment about it. All of my friends have seen Moon Knight, but legally we haven't. We Disney Plus doesn't know us, right? And then another difficulty of monetizing was donation fatigue. The Philippines is regularly hit not just by a pandemic, but calamities, et cetera, et cetera. So how could you monetize an audience that basically has no money left to give? So these are among the assumptions that we wanted to test. So first, we ran a survey, and the thing with the survey was that Splice helped us to put up a separate website where we invited people to go and answer, and it was separate from like the Puma brand. So Puma Podcast, one of our challenges is that a good number of us have come from corporate communication backgrounds, and so we were always like, what is the brand messaging, and or is it aligned and all that stuff? And we were advised by Splice that to be able to break through to your audience, you need to remove that, and you need to bring like a level of authenticity so that they know that you're trying to work with them and they're not talking to a brand that's just trying to sell them something. And so we put up this separate site. And one of the things that was interesting in the survey was that Splice actually introduced ideas that we'd never had, and they were ideas that resonated with the audience. An example is that they gave the option of the Puma podcast team going to someone's house and doing a recording there. We would have never proposed that, but a bunch of people said yes, they would like that. And then one of the biggest findings was that more than 50% wanted to join a Puma podcast board of listeners so that they could have a say in what content we would develop moving forward. So that was a very clear indicator. Like, they're not just invested in listening, they want to be a part of the creation of it. They wanted a sense of that real involvement in what we do. And then another like interesting thing from the study was that previously we had done, like very early on, we did an audience study where Puma Podcast remained invisible. And we commissioned a different organization, they did that. But for this, when we did our focus group discussions, I thought we should remain invisible, but actually Splice encouraged us to be a part of the discussions and to be able to like participate and to listen and to coax out more answers from our audience. And it felt very organic. Heisenberg principle of if you observe a thing, then you affect the thing. But once you embrace that, that's actually part of the process. Then you can move forward with that, with the idea that it's actually important that they're talking to you. And it's actually meaningful that you're showing them that you listen. So 66% of the audience said that they wanted us to help them understand what's happening. 50% said that they actually wanted to learn podcasting or see the behind the scenes stuff. And 30% said that they wanted host and producer meetups. We always feel weird about that because almost all of us are introverts. And then most of the audience is introverted, and yet they're asking for that. But sure. And then I guess relevant to my original assumptions about money, more than half were told us that they wanted a low tier option. Like 50% were willing to pay a monthly subscription of a small amount between $2 and $5. And then there's a bigger amount that we offered. And about 20% said that they would be willing to pay more like a premium fee annually if they could access special features. And then there was 20% that said that they would never give us any money. And that's okay. So based on my assumptions, I was only 20% correct. And close to 80% are actually interested in giving us money in some way. Literally, somebody said, why don't you have a donation button? And another said, if you were able to make a system where I'm donating or where I am a member, but I don't even get anything, but I can tell myself that I'm supporting your mission, then I would be happy to sign up for that. So we were able to break through some of our initial assumptions. So I'll share some of the quotes that we got. One is that Puma Podcast makes me feel like I'm smart, and hey, I belong, which again speaks to our very kind of weirdo introverted audience, right? They found a place where they belong. The next is that we are a credible source of local information, and it's a kickoff point for deeper learning. This rides on the idea that most of our audience said that they turned to us, and there were some that said that they had given up on a lot of other news sources and they were going to us because of our approach to the news. And then some this one up. Well, podcast is like a friend who's in tune. They have taste. The cool and really smart friend I'll seek recommendations from. Excuse me. So there's the sense like that came from there that they wanted us to build a community, and that was a clear signal. And so that's something that we've started to do. So at this point, I want to go from this audience study and sort of zoom out and talk about how do we get here? How do we get to a point where people are asking us for these things? Because we were like zero, like we'd started from scratch. Our team is a team made up of a mix of journalists. We have one journalist, our founder, Robbie Alampay, and he's on TV a lot, but he's more associated with the TV station that he's on rather than Puma Podcast. And so we were building journalistic credibility out of nothing. And so to understand how to go from zero to Puma Podcast is the friend I turn to for the news. I'll talk a little bit about our approach and how we thought about things. So the first thing is that we've had to shift our thinking because we were always so obsessed with being audio first. And we denied any opportunity on any other platform unless it felt required. So it's like, okay, fine, I'll do a Facebook post because everybody does a Facebook post. But everyone was just fiercely anti anything else. And it was like, you guys do video? And we just go, we hate video. Like we hate all of these things. We refuse. Like if you want video, then go hire somebody else. It was an approach that for a time really helped us to clarify and to keep a focus. But at where we are now organizationally, the commitment needs to shift. Like our audience, we realize we are fiercely audio, but our audience actually is pretty agnostic about it. They still continue to appreciate what we do in audio, but they wouldn't mind hearing from us from other things. That said, so one of the reasons why we were able to build such a loyal audience, we are all, we're not gigantic, but like in our first year we did 37,000 listens, and now we are about to break the 1 million listen mark in about 3 years of publishing. We're gonna hit 1 million from that initial growth point, without relying on any celebrities, without trying to do any gimmicks, and just really publishing good stuff. And so one is that we had this intense hype. We were intense and hyper focused on product development. We were totally committed to being audio. We were audio only. Now we're audio first. But this commitment to audio becomes like a rallying cry for people, because they actually see that we're carving out an artistic space in audio. And so every time that we develop something, we are expected to have a different approach. So for example, when we did the audience study, the audience would be like our FGD participants would say, I wish you would do, and then they would name like a foreign show. I wish you would do like 99% Invisible, but your way. Or I wish you would do blank, like Freakonomics, but your way. And they would do that because they felt like there was something, they felt like there was a Puma Podcast approach. There was like a Puma Podcast stamp to that style of podcasting. Or they would reference this is kind of not nice, but like they would reference a local podcaster and say, like, there's this, blank, they're doing this topic. I wish that you guys would do that show instead. with your approach instead of just them doing it, because there's something there. And so even without necessarily the audience knowing what our process is or knowing what our podcasts go through, they understood the product quality. And so we had this need to maintain that across all of the shows that we did. Um, so far we've launched 40 different shows now, and we have published over 600 episodes. So there's a content quality. And of course, like by now, if we listen to something from year one, we're a little embarrassed by it. But that's sort of the way of production. So because we've had this approach, the audience has come to trust that if we put something out, it's going to be something that likely they will enjoy, or someone they know will enjoy. And so now the thing becomes, how do we go from audio only to audio first, but expanding? So here's one thing that we did is we actually asked them to name themselves. I hate this name. But this is what the audience decided to call themselves. They've called themselves the Puma Pants Club. Yeah. So we did like a knockout poll. We asked them to first, we asked the audience to generate the finalist names. A list of names, and then we asked them to vote. And we thought, it would just come down to one, and it came down to two: Puma Peeps, Puma People, or Puma Pants Club. And they chose Puma Pants Club. I don't know. I tried to cheat in these elections. I tried to convince like this group of people who wanted to be interns to vote, but their votes came in too late. So anyone who thinks that there's a conspiracy, it's really hard. It's really hard to like do a conspiracy because people just don't show up on time. But yeah, so one is this engagement with the audience. Next is that we started to branch out into other stuff. So this is a sheet of stickers that we've done. So we're starting to explore IRL merch again. We people like this. I have a show that is about guitars, so we have like branded guitar picks that we give away. We're moving into that merch space to further engage. Another beyond just the podcasting that we do is that we've started doing newsletters. So here's one sample of it. And so we're getting people to sign up for the newsletter. We're holding Twitter spaces on more relevant topics. The Twitter spaces become an opportunity for people to hang out, and it feels safe. So that's one of the things that we were told during the FGDs. The funny thing is they said, like, if you are a Puma podcast listener, I wish that I could talk to somebody else about the things that you are talking about. And so they were like, make a space for it. So far we've done Twitter spaces, we've done live streams. We've actually done a Twitter space where we had the conversation, some of the audience talked, and then we took some of the audience responses, and then we turned that into an episode. And then, of course, we acknowledge the audience member, just so that they get that sense that they are participating. And so that's just the first step in engaging the audience in helping us to create content together. And then our live streams are trying to bring together other podcasters from the Philippines. So like I usually host those, but the idea is that, for example, a bunch of history podcasters or a bunch of women podcasters talking about, women in history or women in sports or something like that as a crux for more conversation. But the idea is that we really just want to try more things. And then a different like alternative approach was that we actually did some influencer campaigns last year. So not audio at all. We got 4 of the sort of big famous comic book artists, and we asked them to create art based around the theme kailangan totoo, or it needs to be real or true. This was in reaction to all of the fake news, misinformation, disinformation. And so we spent a little bit of money to commission the art. And then everything else was just sent out, and we sent it out to film directors, theater actors, different kinds of artists, other podcasters, musicians, etc., etc. and we also partnered with Verifiles, which is a fact-checking organization. So you get the image, you get the story of a content creator who is talking about why they're committed to telling the truth. Um, and then it always links out to a packet, and the packet is a shorthand guide for fact checking. So anyone who wants to learn how to fact check better or to improve that media literacy, they can get it through that link. And so we got something like 400,000 engagements from this one from this one campaign. So it was, and it also, so it's interesting in that we leveraged our audience to create this and to spread it, and then it helped us to build our audience up even more. One lesson is to, if you're a podcaster, you have to think beyond audio at a certain point. The next is to stay agile. And this sort of is kind of self-explanatory. You have to constantly be on the run. You have to be checking, your sides and figuring out where you need to move in the podcasting landscape. For us, again, starting with zero and then moving into a space where everyone listened to podcasts, we had to keep adapting. And so one of the reasons why we think that we were able to adapt is that we have a mission and vision that we regularly share, and that we talk about, and that other people, even outside of the organization, can commit to. So our vision is a world that listens. Our mission is to show the joy, power, and value there is in listening. And so it's a mission that's allowed us to adapt and respond to the things that we're dealing with today. And one of the things that that we obviously had to confront during the pandemic is that there's all of these projects, there are challenges and opportunities. And one way that I think we were able to build an organization that was resilient was that we were able to continue to just come back to our values. And then we just say, does this project actually align with our mission? Are we able to execute our mission by doing this? Does this, does aligning with this organization allow us to help build a world that listens? And this has guided us in walking away from projects and turning projects down, and then in pursuing more challenging projects, because it's like, hey guys, this is going to be difficult. This won't be as financially rewarding as some other opportunities, but this perfectly fits our mission. And then everybody else would be like, okay, I'm perfectly fine with not chasing cash just so that I can do something that follows our mission. And it gives us like this constant that we can keep coming back to. And even like in interpersonal challenges, you can just stop and say, but are you listening? All right. Even when things get heated and there are agreements, are we listening? Are we practicing that listening that we say that we have with, that we're the listening that we're trying to promote with our audiences? Is this something that we're doing with each other right now? And then it gives us pause, and then we recenter, and then we can go move the discussion forward after doing that. So having a set of values is really important. Another thing that we learned, not just during the pandemic, but all throughout, and something that people can commit to, is we're comfortable with iteration. So this is, I asked the team to give me this specific image because it is SpongeBob throwing garbage out. Because we have built a team that is perfectly comfortable with design and iteration. And we will junk drafts, we will junk episodes, and we will junk whole series if we feel like it's not performing at the level that we would want. Very early on, I did like a 2-day coverage. I captured so much audio. I had like 8 hours of tape from an event. And then in the middle, I realized, wow, this kind of sucks. And then I just didn't even offer to the editorial board. And that's how we have been. And even as recent as like 2-3 weeks ago, I have had a script that has been completely rewritten by someone to make it what it needs to be. And we all have to be comfortable with that at any level of the organization. Like, people can jump in and fix the work, and we're just totally okay with it, whether it gets scrapped or it gets repurposed. Um, this is going to be essential because, um, the best thing for horrible work is for it to never reach your audience. So like, it's okay to make bad work, but it's okay to make sure that that bad work never sees the light of day. Um, and then the last thing was, another thing is that we have been able to respond to the moment. So this is a silly gif from Boba Fett. I can't get over it, but I love it because he just does so much movement and it's unnecessary, but it was great in the moment. And so that's how we have been in COVID. Let's to be honest, we have had our backs against the wall, financially, content wise, and we've struggled throughout to try and figure out, like, at the start, what does our news even look like? We canceled our news program for a few months in the early months of COVID because no one wanted to hear any other news except COVID news. And we were able to develop programming specifically around COVID. And as COVID has been dying down, hopefully, fingers crossed, as the threat has evolved, we have now had to evolve. And I think more importantly for our revenue side, because of the growth of podcasting and our growth, more sponsors and more brands are interested in supporting our work. But we still need to make sure that all of those things align. So how do we adapt? How do we make it fit? You know, we work with a number of telcos, so it's like, how does this telco's values actually align with this? And we'll be able to say, we don't think that your values align with this show of ours, but it might work for another one, and we can create content that really will be meaningful to the audience. So part of the other things is we are always looking to the next thing. So I always believe that if there is an artistic medium, the way to make it more artistic is to lean into what its limitations are. As an example, if you have a comic book, then you don't have sound and you only have visuals. And so when I write comic books, I will put as few words as possible so that it only operates on a visual level. And so when I talk about that, then I start thinking about, well, what is wrong with me as a person? And I always think, well, I have like this massive like need to perform, like Bruce Lee over here, like the need to excel at what you are doing. And so I've leaned into that as not as a weakness and as a strength, in developing our content. Like, I'm always thinking about what is the artistic edge, like how far out can we go artistically with our podcasting? What is the next thing that we can do? Because if I'm looking at the market now and it's talk podcasting with celebrities talking for like 3 hours, that's where it is now. But where can I take this this medium and turn it into something else so that people will pay attention to the artistry that we're practicing? And so that's what we've been thinking about in terms of audio production, storytelling. How do we tell stories that are so boring? Like, I really like taking boring things and then trying to find ways to make them more interesting so that people will pay attention to them. And so figuring out how to take all of this demand for artistic edge and then coupling it with just the high level of journalistic skill, that the team has. We've brought those things together, and that's allowed us to make really interesting projects. And so one of those that I'll talk about very briefly is called Radyo Malaya. So we were approached by the Cultural Center of the Philippines to help celebrate 100 years of radio in the Philippines and to help celebrate the EDSA revolution of 1986 and make sure that people don't forget it, to bring it into a modern medium as a podcast. And what we did here is that it was like a War of the World style recreation, where we took actual tape from 1986. And then we got the actual reporters. Like there's a very famous journalist on TV now, Ed Lingao. But he, in 1986, he knelt with a bunch of nuns. He knelt in front of tanks, and it stopped the tanks from advancing. We got him to go on tape and act as his younger self being interviewed. We got reporters who were covering this as young junior reporters to sort of reprise their roles and be phoning into our newsroom. And then we did audio filtering so that our news reports, which we had produced and recorded live, would sound similar to the audio quality of things that were broadcast in 1986. And then because we were working with the Cultural Center of the Philippines government and stuff, they said, and we need this in a month. So we did. They gave us CDs that we had to convert. We did the research with them, and then we did all of the writing, all of the production within a month. And so the idea was to really create not just a podcast, but an experience. One of the things that we take pride in was that during the memorial of the EDSA revolution, at the monument, they played this. They played the podcast series through the festivities. And one of the pieces of feedback that we got was that one listener said, I was inside that hall in Club Filipino when Cory Aquino, our president, took her oath of office. My husband and I were on EDSA the entire 4 days. I entrusted my 2 kids to my daughter's godmother. My son was 2 years old, my daughter 4 months, in case we wouldn't be able to return alive. I meant it literally. The memories are all coming back because of this. It's making me cry. So we were able to create this piece that a lot of people who've heard it, like we've fooled our friends. We even fooled the staff. Like when we did listening sessions, they didn't realize that, that some of it was newly written content. And so we're able to do all of these crazy projects. And part of it is that we have, built a team that will sort of understand that each project is going to be crazy. And, so this was the quote that I used with my staff. And then they said, we don't understand that. Apparently, like I was the only person on staff who had studied Shakespeare. So they're like, it's too highbrow for us. Give us something more pop culture that we can understand. So I gave them this one. So the idea is that you build a culture where your entire team feels like, they will ride or die with. And so then when a project like this comes up and you say, we have a month, we have 3 months, we're going to try and change things by creating a podcast that nobody's done before. They're like, okay, sure, let's do it. Let's find a fun way to do it. And we've been attempting to preserve and scale that culture and that approach. And so I think that the way that this all ties in is our crazy approaches to our content development inspire our audience to keep going with us. And they feel like they're a part of it and they're part of the journey with us. Yeah. So I think I've talked enough. Yeah.
Yay! Thank you, Carl.
I will stop sharing.
I think that the Raja Malaya, it's incredible what you were able to do in a month's time, no? And working with all of the old audio as well. It just sounds incredible. So we're gonna turn to some questions now, if that's all right with you, Carl.
Yeah.
We have a question from Marty. Marty, if you're here, perhaps if we could unmute Marty and if Marty could turn on his video. Marty Logan, he's a podcaster as well. He produces and hosts Nepal Now podcast. So I don't know, is Marty around? Can we unmute him? Yeah.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Hi, Marty. Would you like to?
Hi, Marty.
Hello.
Hi. Hi, everyone. Hi, Carl. Thanks a lot. That was really interesting. to hear about the evolution of your work was great. And I want to now, when we're done, go to your website and check out everything you're doing, because it really sounds very interesting. But as someone whose podcast is much smaller, I'm interested to hear a little bit more about your beginnings, because I noted down this figure. I think you said in your first year you had 37,000 listens. I mean, to me, that's huge. And you also said that you started from zero. So I'm just wondering, from 0 to 37,000 sounds fantastic. How did you get to that point?
Sure. So it was like 0 to 10 first. So it was like 10, 15 a day. The first 6 months were a lot of figuring out what we should be doing. I want to be clear that we didn't know we didn't know what we were doing when we started. It's like, yeah, I've listened to a million podcasts before, and then you're there and you're like, okay, so how do we actually do this? And some of the things that we did were, one, we made sure that there was regular publishing. So for the most part, the team was committed to 5 times a week newscast. And the thing is that our team started with a very like TV mindset, because TV was the easy referent, and 3 of the 4 founders came from TV. And so they were thinking that, because the TV package in the Philippines is about 22 minutes for the 30-minute TV segment. And then I started messing around with it and being like, well, why does it have to be 20 minutes? Why does it have to be 4 stories? Why can't it be 3 stories? Why can't it just be 1 story? And so then we started messing around with what could be put out in a day and what programming should look like in a week. And we started to come to this very clear sense of pursuing slow news. And so no chasing the headline, but always having more insight. And so that's one, is that we established an identity where if people wanted to understand the whole story, they could come to us. And that's still like how we're packaged. Right now, we're part of Spotify Your Daily Drive. And like, it's podcast 1 is just a headline rundown from one of the big news orgs. And then podcast 2 is a market rundown. But then podcast 3 is ours. And ours is a 5 to 8 minute explanation. And so that's how we started building a like momentum, is to really separate ourselves from the rest of the market. And then we got a few big bumps. So we knew early on that social media wasn't going to help. It's really not helpful. Like, Facebook is really, really not helpful to adding to your listens. It adds to your potential impact, but it doesn't add to your listens. So we had to shift focus. Where else could we get more listenership? And the weird thing is that our listenership would increase every time that we got featured in traditional media or in websites. So the key was to get PR out there. And then whenever an organization runs your PR, we would see like a really clear bump. So whenever we would have what we felt was like a really significant story, we would write PR about it. We would send it out. And we were very open when we would get scoops or we would find something. We would actually offer up our bits of audio so that they could be repurposed. And that's really helped. So rather than being adversarial to other news organizations, we tried to be as friendly as possible, and then to sort of try and signal boost on each other as much as possible. So that's one. And then 2 is that we started to diversify the audience, to diversify our audience offerings. So from about month 1 to month 4, we have 1 show. And then from month 5 down to the end of the year, of that first year of publishing, we launched 5 different shows, and they were like law and politics, economics, sports, And so each of those started to reach a different audience. And all you needed was like one or two hits that would then generate back listening on your other content. So we did an economics podcast. That was the topic. The topic was why aren't you married yet? And it was economics answers to why I choose to remain single. And that would just get a regular boost. And what we found is that once we started doing that, then that generated more interest. And so again, from year 137,000 to now, where by the end of this month we'll hit 1 million. It's been those kinds of like off kilter approaches, and we've banked on the evergreen nature of our content. So if you go back again, like we'll be embarrassed about the audio quality or some kind of engineering thing that we did, but the content still holds. And so we have a lot of religious festivals in the Philippines, and every time that one rolls around, we have stories that will get like an additional 500 to 1,000 listens because people will be looking for podcasts about it. So that really helps to position your content as evergreen.
I hope that answered your question, Marty. I definitely, from our experience, from Boju Bajai's experience, I feel like we give so much value to social media, like as sort of just pushing our content out there. And like you said, it converts into sort of engagement maybe, but really our challenge really has been, how do you convert those likes and comments into actual listens? So yeah, that's a very different take, I think, and something that maybe will help us as well. Do we have
I think
any
the
more?
answer is TikTok.
Yeah, we are getting there. We are getting there.
We are getting there. No, I'm joking.
So we've reached this point where we know we need to be there, but
Yeah.
no one is young enough. So we did a special series. We worked with TikTok. We did a special sports series around the Olympics. Our videos were doing like 2 million listens per, but that actually doesn't translate into listens on the platform on podcasting.
Yeah.
But I think the insight for me is that the younger you are, the more likely you are to be listening to TikTok. It's like 70 to 20 is TikTok. But as you get older, like each year that someone gets older, that's the higher the likelihood that they will convert into a podcast listener. And so for me, the strategy is, while get them aware of our brand and the storytelling that we do, and then when they start looking for stuff, then they're ready to listen to the other podcasts.
Yeah, we're taking notes.
Invest in the future. Invest in your.
Yeah.
We've even done, like, we just released a series of children's books based on our podcast. Yeah,
Amazing.
That's amazing. Like the media, because I would have never thought that an audio medium would get converted to a book. Like, it's usually the other way around. So that's like, the inversion and the fluidity. I think that's really exciting. Do we have any more questions? Sorry. No?
No.
If anyone has any questions, you can either raise your hand, or just like, if you don't wish to speak, you can just use the chat function. So Carl, something that I think all podcasters will want to know, especially Nepali podcasters too, is, at the moment, the podcasting space in Nepal is sort of the celebrity-driven podcast that you mentioned yourself, which is 2 to 3 hours of unedited, conversations where the host is really bringing in a celebrity, and it's the celebrity that draws within a day it'll have like 200,000 views on YouTube.
Lots of sponsorships.
A lot of sponsorships, yes. But we're just trying to sort of understand, because when you start aligning your visions and your missions to potential donors, potential like sponsors, etc., suddenly already the medium is so niche that there's not much in terms of support, like financial support. And then when you have like a specific vision, again, that becomes even more niche. So how have you guys done anything differently in terms of creating a funding ecosystem that perhaps is different to sponsorship or funding from development partners or grants, for instance?
Sure. So I guess the first is to dispel that celebrity thing. Because I remember at the end of 2019, I went to this conference with a bunch of other podcasters, and I was just like, the people running the podcast thing were like, how to find your next host. And then they had a picture of like Joe Rogan, Tim Ferriss, and Oprah. And I wanted to say, why are you presenting? Because that's dumb. Like, why would that be our one? Joe Rogan, but like he was a media professional for 20 years before he became the celebrity podcaster that he is. Like, sure, people probably aren't old enough to remember that he was on Fear Factor or that he was on like on sitcoms way back in the 90s. So he's been developing himself as a broadcaster for the longest time. So you can't just suddenly say, I'm going to go be the next Joe Rogan, because he spent 20 years becoming Joe Rogan and then started his podcast. Same thing with Tim Ferriss. Tim Ferriss, by the time that he started his podcast, he was a best-selling author. For Our Work Week, all of this stuff, like he's a best-selling author who starts a podcast. That is not so. Are you telling me that like the way to discover your next podcaster is go be a celebrity and then start a podcast? Like that is not a way for a podcasting company to be successful. And then like you look at what's happening with Spotify with Rogan now, and they're in a bind because they just they threw so much money at him that now he has control over them. And as soon as his contract ends, he can leave them. And again, that's not a way to build a podcast business if you want to sustain. And also if you want to have some editorial control over what you do. So that means that we're not chasing Joe Rogan money. Like that has to be the first thing. When we position ourselves there, we're not chasing celebrity money because we're not going to be Archwell. Like, I don't even know why they need all, like, like obviously if any of the Obamas put out a podcast, it's going to be a hit podcast, and anybody, yeah. So we need to remove that from our equations, because like that's not within our set of givens, right? So within our set of givens, what are the things that we bring to the table that are totally unique and different from just some other celebrity coming on and doing it? And again, like, I'm not saying that this is wrong and that celebrity shouldn't do it, but like, if you work with a celebrity, then it becomes a matter of leveraging what the opportunities are. But as a podcast company, it's going to, if you don't come to a good agreement, so like one of our approaches is that whenever we co-develop a property, the hosts that we develop it with half own that property. So if you were working in TV or whatever, the network owns it, they develop it, they own it. You're the talent, you're paid an outright fee, and that's it. For us, we can't afford to pay as much. Excuse me. But we say, you own half, we split royalties down the middle once we recoup costs. And so then that tells the co-host, our talents, our hosts, or whatever, it tells them that we don't have the big bucks to go hire a celebrity, but we want to build something with you. And if this gets big, like, you're getting big with it. So that's one approach. As for the overall like funding picture, it would be disingenuous of me to say that we don't rely on grants. But what we have done is we've diversified the funding picture. So almost all of the grants support our news production, because no one wants to pay for the news. That's the brands are afraid to fund journalistic projects lest they be attacked by our government. Is not nice to journalists. So anyone who funds it, it can be a problem. But what we've done is we've created sponsorship packages, particularly for big corporations. Sorry. And so we have shows that are values aligned with corporations. So we have a show like, it's called Better Normal. And each episode is one idea that can bring us to a better normal. Yeah. And brands can say, we support this kind of thinking. Here's some money, make your show.
Yeah. No, that's something. I was just wondering, you have you produce so many shows, right? when you guys first started out off, did you have this issue with finding like talent, you know, in terms of just like putting that team together and having sort of that skill set that comes in with a medium that perhaps is very new in the country? And how did you go about sort of addressing those gaps, maybe?
So 100% talent is a challenge, and it continues to be. So I think producers are the biggest like gap, because production is a weird thing. One of the early challenges was audio production. So getting the right sound people to get on board. And that's sort of been the easiest thing for us to pull together. Now we have a really strong team of sound designers and sound engineers. And they're like weirdly happy. Like they think they like, for those of us who are primarily journalists as opposed to like audio tech, like moving these squiggles around is a real challenge, but them, they're just, zooming along, pulling together episodes at any time. So the first was that, but what we found was that people who are coming from radio or TV, the jump was not technical, it was aesthetic. So trying to move them from radio thinking to podcast thinking, or trying to move them from TV thinking to audio thinking, which was easy enough. Very similar, I guess, to what Molly Webster was talking about last night. We do listening sessions, and that was our way to establish our aesthetic. So everybody in a room listening to it and then giving comments. And then at a certain point, the audio editor learns, right, so this is how I should be doing this. And these are the rhythms that we establish. Producers continue to be the challenge, because a producer is a project manager and the storyteller for us. And so having someone who is responsible, who will like keep that schedule going, but also knows how to pull a story together from the various elements and keep that vision, that's been a challenge. And one way that we've overcompensated on that has been to have a very strong, very aggressive editorial board, which includes me and Robbie and our head of content, Trisha, and like we'll just pull in a bunch of like people who are really happy to tear work apart and just like go at it. And ideally, once that you tear the work apart, then the producer gets used to putting it back together, and at some point they get it. So like one person that we brought on, and we brought her on, this was her first like audio and news job, and now she's just she has one of our more successful podcasts because she's benefited from that training. But bringing in enough people, keeping them here, that continues to be a challenge.
Okay. Yeah. Prikuti, do you have any questions? Sorry, I felt like.
No, I feel like now we sort of, I do have a lot of questions. I've been like taking so much notes that I think we need a separate session for that. But it's really amazing about not just the content side, but also how you've sort of like worked on the whole audience relationship management, that a phrase that we've learned about just last month, about how it's so important for companies like ours to do that. But yeah, thank you so much, and we really have a lot to learn from you. And I particularly really like the fact that how you also try to engage with your listeners beyond just the product, and hey, this is our product, listen to it, but having them on the listeners board or organizing Twitter spaces and then turning that into podcast, something that we've sort of thought about in the past, like 100 other things, but not been able to execute on time. We'll definitely get to that, I hope, soon. But thank you so much, Carl. This was so insightful. And I feel like a lot of our audience, whether or not you're into podcasting, I feel like it might have given you insights into like how to create better products, how to think about the market, how to think about, most importantly, about like being true to your content and sort of the values that your product has. Because like Carl said, I think one similarity is how you said your audience talk to each other. In that way, I feel like Itisha and I also are sometimes able to say, okay, this is the kind of audience that would listen to Boju Bajai, and if they get in the room, they will be able to talk to each other. I think that's really something important to think about as we learn to engage more with our audience. So thank you so much, Carl, and thank you everyone for being part of this.
Thank you.
We have, yeah.
And on that note, Carl, thank you for the amazing presentation, the gifts. I mean, we love gifts.
Yes.
And thank you for your time. And I'm sure we'll be in touch outside of the festival too. That was great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Take
Thank
care.
you.